Hi everyone, welcome. We're out here in my garden. I'm back here with today being the middle of June, 14th or 15th. See how my garden's doing after a month and a half now. It was May 1st when I got everything planted. Everything was recently trimmed, so everything looks a little bit bare of foliage, but trust me, it's following a plan. But that's not what we're here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is my outdoor worm bin, which just happens to be in this trash pail out here. And if you're a regular here on my channel, then you'll know that during the entire winter we kept checking in on this bin because it was originally set up to see how will it hold up to the cold weather over the winter, even though it was a fairly mild winter. So the worms really didn't have a very challenging time of it, and I took pretty good care of them, but it definitely seemed like they could have handled much rougher weather. They did great. If you go way back to the beginning, then this bin has been in service for hundreds of days now, dozens of feedings, and it's got a pretty good amount of weight to it. But it's still kind of set up with a bunch of stuff in here. Let me get you a little bit closer, you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see there's a whole bunch of cardboard laid in here to protect the bin from cold from the outside. I had even shoved some leaves in as extra insulation around the perimeter. And then there were multiple things covering this as well as the original plastic lid and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip away a lot of this stuff that was put in here for insulation, the cardboard, all the extra leaves. I'll take off whatever's resting on top. I want to try to size up how this material is coming along, because if it was just a regular bin in my my worm bin, after this much time I'd be looking to harvest it. And I've never really had much of a plan for harvesting this thing, but I would like to get the process completed, or at least see how close to that it is. If there's anything we could do to help it, maybe remove some large chunks of food in there so they can focus on what remains as far as little scraps are concerned, then that would be a nice thing to try to do, to try to drive this material towards completion, and then eventually see if we can get the worms to migrate out of it. Over here, this is a sort of like a felt material, but it holds up really good outdoors. It's a grow bag, and I have like the outer one that's got a couple holes in it, and then there's an inner one, so it's really two layers, two grow bags, one inside of the other, to become the new home for these little guys. So after we strip out all the cardboard and the excess material, I guess I'm just going to dump the remaining contents into here, and I think from here on in I'm going to keep running these worms in here. It'll give us a little bit more space, a little bit less depth, not have to reach in so far to see what they're up to, and hopefully an easier way to just manage them overall. So let's get into it. You know, let's just get this cardboard out of our way. That'll be an easy way to begin. I really don't get into this bin very often. It's been 14 days since I came in here last. I had some tomatoes that were going bad, and I dumped them in here as they're feeding. Certainly wasn't a great deal of stuff. I always made sure there was plenty of leaves hanging around on the top surface. That's another food item that they like. Not sure what this is. Something I believe started maybe growing in here in the bin. So I'm getting down to some pretty nicely broken down stuff, but I'm still peeling it off so we can get a good idea of what we've got here. This might also be something that's growing here. Those roots look pretty fresh. Same thing here. Let's see how much more of this stuff we can pick out. That's clearly large, uncomposted chunks. Okay. Got a little worm here, get him back down. And, you know, if you start going down a little bit deeper, like right here, I can already see if I go down another inch or two, I'm getting right into a spot that's mostly castings at this point. A lot of this stuff on top is just pretty heavily broken down, but not quite castings yet. It didn't seem large enough to warrant its removal when we were scraping stuff off the top. I guess if I find any other larger chunks, maybe I'll just toss them into our little collection bucket I've got on the side here. Let's start piling up some of this stuff. Now we're getting more into a material that looks like finished castings. Here and there I can see some leaves, different stuff in it. This is the stem of a pumpkin, which in most of my bins usually gets broken down pretty quickly, but this one seems like it's holding up quite nicely. Surprised it's not more. Oh, not true. I give it a little squeeze, I can already tell it's pretty much hollow. So they're working it, they're getting there. I guess as long as we started digging here, maybe we'll go a little bit deeper here to see if we can get a sense of how deep this is. It's probably a little bit deeper than I'm accustomed to as far as, you know, usually composting within bus boxes. Those plastic restaurant trays that I use. Going this deep into material is a little bit unusual for me. I'm not used to having quite so much in a bin. I was a little bit deceived by how much I had in here. I didn't think it was quite so much, but when I lifted it up, I could tell already I had a lot more than I'm usually dealing with. Lots of really nice castings, but it's clearly littered with all kinds of bits and pieces, all kinds of food scraps. This is like possibly a avocado shell. Feels like kind of a harder, thin substance. I'm working my way into the middle. I guess I might encounter some other larger items. I suppose anytime I placed food or material in here, I probably just dumped it in the middle. This is like a wad of grass or hay or something. The grass all tears apart easily with just the pull between my fingers. So it's definitely being broken down, but there's no worms in it, so I guess it's maybe more being broken down by maybe microorganisms and stuff. There's a fair number of sticks in here too. I've been trying to put these larger, harder things off on the side into a little bit of a pile. Nice and deep. Here and there I find something. This was a piece of corn cob, but I shattered it before I was able to get a better look at it. I think this material is probably going to benefit from being sort of stirred up a little bit like this. Have a lot of these larger chunks removed, kind of aerate the material throughout. Give us a nice view of how things are breaking down in here, and they're breaking down really nicely. I don't think this is a very heavily populated bin though, so I've never really expected very much from it. I kind of get surprised sometimes when I see significant progress. This might actually be a jumble of twine. When I took down my tomatoes last season and I unwrapped all of my tomato hooks and took the twine down, I had thrown that ball of twine into here to see how well it composts. And the only reason I'm suspecting that it's twine is because I'm having a hard time tearing it, and it just goes around and around, kind of like the way it was when I placed it in here. And I believe I am actually able to tell from some of the pieces more inside that it is in fact the twine that I had thrown in here. It's getting there. Takes some time though, it seems. Maybe it would be a good idea at this point to scoop this stuff out and just throw it into the collection bucket we have. More of the same. Pretty nicely broken down compost throughout, scattered with various types of bedding and food bits everywhere. Yeah, you know, I think it'll benefit this batch a lot to be in the worm bag. It'll be a lot easier for me to check in on it too. It's kind of a drag, you know, having to reach down into this bucket. My arm doesn't quite make it all the way down, so I have to almost lean my body down into the bucket to get to it. You can see it's all melted over here. I put ash into it once and melted it. So I chopped it in half and I strapped it back together to try to preserve it, but it's not as tall as a regular trash pail. If it was as tall as a regular trash pail, there's no way I'd be able to reach into it and get to the bottom. I think a lot of these sticks are probably parts of my garden. I probably tore apart all of my tomato plants and threw them in here, kind of chopped them into little bits hoping that they'd break down, but they're just a little too tough, I guess. Or maybe I've just been giving them other things that are easier to eat that they were more attracted to, or didn't bother with this harder, stiffer material. Here we've got just some leaves all matted together. It's going to be hard to break down if everything's matted together, so if I find matted together materials, I generally try to break them up a little bit. I think we've gone through the majority of the material at this point. Here and there, when I just kind of comb my fingers through the material, I do sense a stick or a stem or something larger in there. Let's see if I could try to fish any more large chunks out. So now you can see I've got a pretty good collection of stuff that came off the top and then out of the material itself. And I guess before we dump it in there, I'll just go through here a little quickly one more time, see if we can find any other large chunks. Okay, pretty good. I think we're pretty free of most large sticks and stems and chunks of uncomposted materials in here. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start relocating the contents into this grow bag. See how heavy this thing is though. Not bad. I think we've removed a little bit of weight, not too much, a few pounds, but a little bit. Still a fair amount of stuff in here, a pretty good weight to it still. And I'm wondering if I could just pour it out. You know, maybe in the beginning I'll just scoop by hand. So this is a cork that was placed in here some time ago. It's actually listed on my tracking spreadsheet that there's a kind of an unusual test object in this container, and it's this cork. This cork has gone from composting tray to composting tray, and at no point do I ever see any sort of progress being made. Well, actually, you know what? I just pretty easily managed to chip off pieces of it that would normally be much harder to break off. So wow, first evidence of any sort of progress on this cork. I'm keeping it with the worms. We'll see how much longer it takes. As I get closer and closer to the bottom, we're encountering more and more piles of worms, ones that like to be at the very bottom. I guess where most of the moisture collects and doesn't have the chance to drain out. So we've got, I don't know what we've got here, you know. I mean, I started with European night crawlers and I added red wigglers. But I am not really that good at distinguishing one from the other. Who knows what I've got here in my hand? Probably mostly red wigglers, because that's really what I believe I placed the greater number of worms in here of. It's kind of nice that the more damp, muddy stuff that's at the very bottom is now at the top surface of my new container. It'll give the stuff a little bit of a chance to air out. Not bad. Now I believe we're approaching the point where it might just be easiest to dump out what remains. There's really not a lot left in here. I'm going to do my best to make sure we don't leave any wormies behind. I may actually just rinse this out over my garden so that any worms that do remain just get rinsed into my garden. This way they'll be in a good spot where they could burrow down into the dirt. And it'll be a spot where they can do my garden some good too. I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a rinse, then we'll take a closer look at how our grow bag is looking. So now this seems to me, at least, to have the proportions of a real worm bin again. Now, you know, that means just more surface area versus not being as deep as what we had before. So I think that's nice to have a little bit more more of a diameter for the material to spread out more and for there to be more of a top surface. So yeah, I guess scatter this stuff across the top, give it a quick plastic cover, and just let it continue. All right, so I guess we're not feeding today, although this is still what I consider to be part of the feeding phase. At some point when we actually try to get the worms to move out of the material after they've completely broken it down, it'll be at that point that I treat the feeding stage as done, and us at that point being in the stage of trying to depopulate the material, get the worms migrated. So for now, they're just going to continue with what they've had, just in a slightly different configuration. But that's it for today. Let me get wrapped up. Let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you for sticking around and watching my video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to give me a thumbs up. It's really appreciated. And also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel as well. That's really appreciated too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.